It could be the biggest thing to happen at Google since the company's IPO, but that all depends on whether Larry Page can be the next Steve Jobs. Page returns to the CEO's office today, a decade after handing the reins to Eric Schmidt. Eugene Munster is one believer in Larry Page. He says having him back in charge will inspire Google. Eugene is an analyst at Piper Jaffray. We like to call him the MVP of mobile and internet analysts. Gene, good to see you again. Tell me then, will Larry Page do for Google what Steve Jobs did for Apple?
I think over the next year, probably not, but longer term, he definitely can inspire innovation at Google. It's a different setup what Larry Page has walked into versus Steve Jobs, a very broken company. The problem with Google is just the growth isn't that inspiring, and it's shifting more into like a Microsoft type of phase, a lot more regulation on Google. So I think the impact that Larry Page is going to make on Google over the next several years is going to be more subtle, but definitely needed.
Okay, we've talked about this before, a Microsoft-like situation for Google. So what does Larry Page need to do to make Google more successful than Steve Ballmer has been with Microsoft?
Well, I think Larry Page needs to look outside of the U.S. I think that if you look at the other markets, I think there are some markets, for example, Korea, with Naver is an area that that's the existing biggest search engine there. They could do some acquisitions there to try to beef up some of the growth that they haven't experienced in some of these other emerging markets. So that's one area. And second is really to continue to fuel innovation. They've got the big pillars already in place with Android, YouTube, and now they're doing some more things with social, and just really kind of inspire and create new products within these areas that Eric Schmidt has outlined. So the framework's there just needs to be more innovation within that framework.
Gene, what's the biggest risk here? Eric Schmidt said that adult supervision is no longer required. It's a great line, but people wonder whether or not Larry Page is up to being the kind of professional CEO that the investing community demands from a company like Google, as large, as sophisticated as Google.
When I talk to investors, they see this biggest risk of just that, is spending without limitations. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen, but that is the risk, is that when you're really going after growth and trying to take a company as big as Google to grow it, there can be some expense considerations that could get a little bit out of whack, which could concern investors. I think there's a bigger concern for investors that growth won't continue. So, in other words, I think that it would be a good thing for Google to depress their margins in the near term to try to get top-line growth to reaccelerate.
Gene, just before the break, you made a very interesting point that, in your opinion, the risk here is less that Larry Page is not an experienced enough or capable enough CEO. It's that Google isn't growing fast enough, and Page might not make the right decisions to reignite that growth. What does he need to do? What does he need to focus on? What priorities does he need to set, in your opinion, to make Google, quote-unquote, a growth company again?
I think the biggest is just monetizing Android. They have a platform out there. They have the market share leader in terms of number of users for a smartphone operating system, but it's really trying to get the monetization up, and that can be new ad formats for mobile. It could be the idea of walking down the street and getting ads served up to you as you go from location to location, which might not sound very exciting for users, but in terms of advertisers, that's very exciting, and there's opportunities to build revenue around that. So that's probably the biggest area that he can really focus in on, is monetization of Android. And second is just trying to get growth outside of the U.S. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult for them in China and Russia, but there are markets like Korea that they're really not a player in, and that they could build some market share. So the key is this. Google does not want to become what Microsoft became in the late 90s, which is this behemoth non-growth story. And they have opportunities to innovate around mobile in particular that I think you're going to see them. Also, the social side is an area that they haven't really tapped into, which they're exploring.
Gene, you make an argument that is kind of in favor of Larry Page, in as much as he's an engineer, and some of the things that Google needs to do are very engineering focused. But my question is this: can shareholders trust Larry Page to think or to run the company in their best interests? We've watched Google go off onto all kinds of side projects that, at least from most people's perspectives, just hasn't translated into much in the way of revenue or profit.
Well, obviously Larry Page is probably knows the story and knows the business. He's one of the two people in the world. He knows it better than Eric Schmidt. And so can you trust Larry Page? I think the answer is yes. I think, as an operator, a lot of the infrastructure is in place right now. So really what he's going to bring to the table is just insight into how to grow these business. The concept of a search results page, it's referred to as a page rank, is something that Larry Page invented. It's named after him. So his ability to be thoughtful about monetization is really where he came from. And so I think that they can trust him. I think that the reality is it takes time. Things like this, companies this size don't change overnight. But I think that this is obviously a positive step for the innovative side of Google. The key is just how do they kind of bridge that gap over into the social realm.
Okay, so he defines success in a way not unlike Steve Jobs. If it's commercially successful, if it makes money, if people like it and it's popular, it's a success, not if it happens to be a cool engineering project that makes, our propellers turn here at Google.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of geeks there, but the reality is that they want to have innovative products that people want to use and advertisers want to spend money on, and that's really what Google is, an advertising company. So if he can just keep doing what he's been good at over the past, but do it from the CEO level, I think that will be positive.
Gene, very quickly, what happens if Eric Schmidt leaves and goes off to take a job, say, in the government or perhaps somewhere else?
I think probably nothing. I think the reality is that today is the day where Eric Schmidt effectively leaves. He's still a part of the company, but the reality is that Larry Page is the guy.
All right, Gene, thank you very much. Gene Munster, an analyst at Piper Jaffray. He stayed with us for overtime, and he said if Eric Schmidt leaves, nothing happens to Google. All the focus is on Larry Page.